I think it's time. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time or place in the world you may be joining us from. My name is Damien Alexander, and I'm the Asia Pacific representative for SQF. So thank you for joining myself this morning. We've got some people that have joined from Japan, Taiwan, across Asia, certainly Australia, where I am based, and New Zealand. So thank you for joining. Welcome to our webinar series. Today's topic is the recall, crisis management, and food safety culture. So how food safety culture impacts on crisis management, and tying that in with recalls as well. Before I hand over to our guest presenter today, the intention of the webinar series is we're going to be running these monthly, every 6 weeks or so, and we're bringing in industry experts to share their experience, knowledge, including international experts, on different subject matters. And this ties in very closely with the importance that we place on our commitment to safe food. So sharing real life examples and lots of experience from across the world. So hopefully that everyone who's joined us can learn some things and learn from good examples, bad examples, what has gone wrong and what has worked in the past. So please continue to join us, and I hopefully look forward to seeing you at future webinar series. The next one will be scheduled for the 29th of September. Before I hand over to Peter, though, I do want to touch on a couple of things that are coming up in the SQF world. So I'm really excited to announce that we are running a food safety conference day. The first one this is a face-to-face conference, and the first one is the 14th of November in Melbourne. We do have numbers limited to 100 for that event. And then the second Safe Quality Food Conference / Focus Day will be the 21st of November 2023 at the University of Auckland. The events are going to be a great opportunity to network, but also the topics and their speakers are tying very closely into the quality management space, obviously the food safety, food quality space, and some education around and future things that are coming up in the future that the quality management, quality teams, business managers should be made aware of. So we're really excited to launch those. We'll be advertising those shortly. Limited numbers for both. We're keeping them as a limited number event, but massive opportunity for networking as well. So hopefully we'll look forward to seeing you and meeting some of you face-to-face for those events. The other information that I want to share with you as well today is that, particularly on the topics that our subject matter experts are going to be talking about shortly, SQF have a number of free guidance documents. So we have on our website guidance documents on food safety culture, food safety withdrawals and recalls, product identification and recall. So they're free documents that anyone can download, jump on download at any point in time. So whether you are SQF certified, looking to become SQF certified, or if you're just a food business in general, these are really relevant to the industry. And likewise too, we offer online training for SQF on implementing food safety culture and recall and crisis management. So they are online training available at any time and offered by SQFI. So if you go to our website, you can find those. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to Peter Holtmann. So, hello, Peter. So, now Peter has been in, and correct me if I go off track on this one, Peter. So, Peter's been working across the food industry and manufacturing since 1994, working as a consultant, an auditor, a trainer, working internationally He's been CEO, he sits on several boards. He works specifically in recall preparedness and crisis management. So getting businesses organized and ready in the event that something does happen, and then likewise supporting the businesses to take them through the incident and how to manage it appropriately. Works very closely with lots of businesses internationally around risk management. And is there anything else I've missed, Peter?
I think that's a pretty good snapshot of what I do.
Excellent. Excellent. So for everyone joining us today, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask either Peter or myself, please add them to the chat. We'll get to those questions at the end if we have time. If we don't have time to answer all of your questions, we will come back to you. So please, if you think of anything, you're not quite sure of something, please add it to the chat, and we'll either jump on at the end and go through them if we have time, or we will contact you directly and come back to you. So Peter, thank you for joining us today. I'll hand over to you, and I'll have some questions for you as we work our way through.
Okay, that's great. I'll just get up to share screen. So I will politely close yours down and start mine. There we go. That should be on screen now. So Damien, thanks very much for letting me speak on this topic today. This is a big topic. There's a lot of stuff that happens around recall management and let alone crisis management. And we sort of thought, did we want to go into the technical side? Do we want to, touch on things about what is regulators like FSANS and other agencies do on that? We thought, let's actually go a different sort of tack and link it back into the food safety culture and around behaviours and decision making in recalls that can potentially lead to a crisis. And the reason why I raise that is because what I see almost on a weekly basis when I'm helping companies around the world either prepare for recall or actually enact a recall situation that could lead to crisis is it's often the behaviours and the decision making that goes horribly wrong in the very first instances. And that's when I've seen recalls escalate and turn into crises turn into uncontrollable situations that eventually shut companies down. So what we really wanted to do is to talk about, well, how can you moderate or modify your behaviours and your culture to try and avoid all those situations and the big losses that come with recall and that the even bigger consequences that come with crisis. And so that's where we want to touch on this today. So we thought, let's start with some of the basics here. So what is a recall in general? These might be for the people here who don't manage this stuff or first time in this area. I won't read everything that's on screen. You can go through it, but I'm using the Australian guidelines, FSANS guidelines, Australian, New Zealand guidelines, really. And it basically says it's action taken to remove from sale, distribution and consumption foods which may actually pose a safety risk to consumers. Now, we also need to think about, well, does that just mean people? No, it can actually mean pets as well. It can mean livestock in those regards. Different requirements for that. But recalls still work in the same sort of manner as we know we've got a problem with our product through accident, through intentional, through adulteration, what have you. We still know we've got a problem with our product. We need to start doing something about it. And the key here is, I've started to elicit on it, is we know about it. And that's going to be quite important when we move through some of the next slides. So now that we've got a recall in our hands, can it actually have a positive outcome? Well, the answer is a definitive yes. Recalls don't necessarily need to be a negative outcome for an organisation. If handled really well and concisely, efficiently, effectively, not only does it build good sustainable practice inside your organisation, in other words, it builds up your resilience, that helps you find root cause and eliminate future issues along the way. Most importantly, how you communicate out to consumer and customer, because there could be a difference. The customer is the person that's buying your product, and downstream, the consumer is the person that obviously is actually using it. You can actually be building confidence from both customer and consumer by doing things right. There's plenty of examples out there on the internet of companies doing it right, good marketing, good PR, timely communications, talking to fact, not just an opinion. Opinions never work, by the way. Try and steer clear of those things. Promises never work. Don't do those either. Stay on point, like I'm trying to do right now. Stay on point, speak about facts, and talk about how you're considering the consumer and the customer and what's in their best interest. Really, really important tips along the way. So it can build customer confidence versus just hoping it goes away and no one notices.
Peter, can I jump in and just ask you a quick question?
Yeah,
Sorry
no,
to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Look, internationally, where recalls are published and the information's made available,
Yep.
the trends internationally are continuing to go up.
Yep.
We're having more recalls that we're made aware of and that's publicly available internationally. In Australia, we had a spike around 2020, middle of COVID. But now we've had recalls reduce. Yep. And there's no right or wrong answer to this, but I'm interested in your thoughts around, is by having more recalls we'll talk about Australia or Asia Pacific, by having more recalls occur, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Damien. So either more recalls means there's more spotlight on regulating food safety in the marketplace, or greater increase in sampling at import inspection and test requirements, or maybe the consumers are becoming more aware and more active. They're the three things that we normally see. So it could be regulatory, it could be consumer, it could be customer driven along the way. It's good that we're catching it, but what are we catching at the end of the day? Is it something that the manufacturer or the producer was aware of and they're being caught short here, or is it something that they've actually taken the lead on? So I think we need to look at the context that sits behind it. So it's good that we're catching things coming through the net, so to speak, or coming to the net. But what was really driving at the root cause, it's most interesting. And when we do spend time underneath the hood of this stuff, Damien, what we're actually finding is there's a lot of cultural elements that are leading up to this. And we've had some awesome stresses in the market that really test culture at the end of the day. One of those is COVID and the need for people to stockpile commodity and product and packaging and everything else. And everyone followed the same lead here. There's stockpiling. And so what happens is all the A-rated suppliers start running out. So people start buying from B, C, D, E, all the way down to, worst case scenario, just to make sure that they've got supply sorted, not necessarily quality, but supply is sorted. So that was an issue we saw as a rise in recalls. And then the other things we saw is things like the ship and the Suez Canal blocking it up and the cost and the delays it put into the system. So what we really find is that it's not the systems that stress the outcome, it's the behaviours and the cultures that really stress the outcomes and the performance of a business. And they're quite fragile. They really are quite fragile. So that's why we like to talk about today around the cultures of these things. How good is your food safety culture? And particularly when it comes to admitting something's gone wrong. And a recall is a good example of that.
Thank you.
Sure. So it can save you money as well, because recalls, if handled well, they're never cheap, but they can be cheaper than a protracted recall situation where you're not just recalling one product off the market. Invariably, you're calling up more than one product off the market because of traceability issues, because of production issues where it's been a contamination of a product line, or because consumer sentiment is gone the wrong way for you. And I've been on recalls where there's been notifications out there and they've called for one product to come back, but consumers are sending every product back that's got your company branding on it. Every product comes back. And that was a result of poor communications. It was muddled. It wasn't clear what state it was in and what product line it was. And so I've been in situations where recalls aren't just, you normally talk about mass balance or 100% recall of raw material and finished. I've been involved with these where it can be up to 600%, 700%, 800% recall of product. That's waste. That's extra cost for you. That's stuff that we need to get ahead of by having good systems and good practices in place. And the practice is the human element to a system, because what's really important here is systems don't run businesses, people run businesses. And it's usually something's gone wrong, not as a result of a system, but as a result of a practice or a human behavior. That's what we invariably see when we do recalls. So I want to really quickly talk about this. I know there's some small pictures on the screen here, but the point is that a crisis and a recall process look very, very similar. The steps look sort of the same. The outcomes are sort of the same. So I really wanted to start touching a little bit on what is the difference between a recall and a crisis here, just because it's in the title and you're sort of saying, well, isn't a recall a crisis? Nope, not necessarily. So we talk about retained risks. We know that there's a problem. There could be an element of food safety or food quality or food security matters that are accepted within the business, and you put controls in place. You've got CCPs, you've got QCPs, you've got PSPs, you've got OSPs, you've got all sorts of things sitting in there. And we manage and mitigate those things. So we've got management plans. And should that be triggered, so in other words, you've exceeded the limits of acceptability, then we're starting to move into what's called a planned recall or a recall process, which means you know what it is, you know where it is, you know what's going on, and you're going to do something about it. Emerging risks are things we haven't quite yet assessed. It could be a change in seasonal labour force that introduces all sorts of problems because of their GMP, because of their food safety training, because of their food security training isn't up to snuff. And so they just do stuff to move product from one end of a production line to another. Yep, happens all the time. I see it all around the world where seasonal workforce come through. Either they're in the field, picking, packing, sorting, right through to busy times when there's production going on, and they can be an emerging risk that you haven't actually considered. So again, where's HR in all of this? How do we make sure we get the right people for the right outcomes? So in an emerging risk, we're sort of moving beyond the expected risks, and we're starting to move into sort of unforeseen or unplanned recall situations. And we're sort of bordering on crisis mode here. If we don't get ahead of it quickly, we're starting to move into a recall and a crisis because it has far more reaching issues with the organisation. The last one down here is what we call black swan events. We don't know until we don't know. It's a commonly used term. Black swan came from back in the 1800s, where they found black swans in Adelaide, of all places, where the only place on earth that has black swans. And up until they found black swans, everyone thought swans were white until we came across a black swan. So that analogy has been used all around the world in risk management and crisis management circles. So black swan are rare events and that are quite unpredictable. And I'll give you some examples. It's malicious product tamper, it's fraud, and food security risks and issues along the way. You can't predict when they happen. You don't know why they're happening or where. And so you need to get onto those things and treat it straight away. We're now in crisis territory. So we're not only doing a recall, but we're managing a crisis for the company. And I've had to do, I think, 3 of these in the last 12 months, 3 real ones in the last 12 months throughout Asia, and one in Europe as well, where employees became disgruntled. They maliciously contaminated product and it was exported to other countries, picked up in those export countries, and it turned into an international issue versus just a national or local or a regional issue. I mean, I've seen washers placed into tofu product. I've seen glass put into chocolate bars. I've seen synthetic products stuffed into feed as packing, padding out the product. So I know that's into the fraud space as well. So these things happen. These are the black swan events, and you need to be able to react and respond to those quite quickly. So even though we've got recall plans and crisis plans, best laid plans are only good after the first contact with the enemy, as they say. What's most important is planning, which is you know what to do next. How much, how far, how often, how bad, how soon. All of these things are the most important thing when you're doing a recall, is being aware of how to do that stuff very, very quickly. And we'll touch on that right now. So this is an example of a crisis. And what happens here, you see that right at the triggering point, things get very, very bad, very, very quickly. We manage it for a short period of time, and then it eventually fades away to return to business as usual and into resilience activities. What's the most important thing here is right on that trigger point is when you talk about behaviours, people fail to assess, plan, and then act. Most people jump right in and say, stand back, everyone, I've got this. I've worked at this business for 15 years. I know exactly what to do here. We call that the superhero complex. They're the people that end up doing more damage than good. You've got plans and you've got planning process. You need to use that. And they're the commas in conversations, not necessarily a full stop, but it's a comma which makes you pause for breath and thought, which is, do we have enough information about what's going on with this issue? How many products are affected? How far has it gone? Can we verify and validate that this is an issue that's caused with us, or was it from an outside interference? Or was it deliberate? Was it accidental? What do we know about it before we just jump straight in? Because the minute we start communicating to regulators, because in Australia we've got a very strict process of product recall and the timings that we've got in order to communicate recall, they're going to want to know all of these sorts of things so that they know we've got control. And if you've just jumped in and said we're doing a recall on this product and without any investigation and validation, you don't look like you're very well in control. You're probably susceptible to more interaction or oversight from regulators and insurers even. Insurers love to get into the mix. So I spend a lot of time working with pretty much most of the world's largest insurance providers that provide contaminated product insurance. That's one of my main roles and why I do so many of these things, is they want to know that companies that buy these insurances have a well thought out plan and they're going to follow planning, not just jump in and do anything, because that costs money. So,
Peter,
yes, mate.
Sorry, quick question. So obviously linking, you stressing the importance around behaviours in a recall and or crisis event. How can you give some recommendations around how to plan for behaviours? So obviously you've got your planning, but how do you then build in your behaviours around that planning process? And sorry if I've jumped ahead.
No, I think it's good. It's a good segue. It stopped me from prattling on about stuff. So there's ways of thinking about doing recalls, and this is like the reactive versus the proactive way. You don't ever want to be on the back foot and say, well, do we really have an issue here? How many times has this occurred? We don't have enough customer complaints yet in order to respond to it, because when you're standing up a recall committee, Damien, how do you even know it's time to stand them up and start talking about stuff? How many complaints have come in? Where's the feedback come from? This is quite often where things start to fall over. Most people think, okay, we've got one complaint, therefore it's time for a recall. Not necessarily. So it's about planning ahead and saying, okay, who gets the lead on collating, compiling, and doing an initial assessment on the information? And that's where the proactive culture comes in. It's good to investigate. It's good to slow down and have a look at this stuff versus just saying, let's just sit back and wait and see what happens. That's not good practice. It's always better to investigate. Even if it goes to a dead end, it really doesn't matter. What you've done is you've been proactive and you're looking for potential threads that could lead into recall or crisis management. You never want to downplay any loss of stakeholder or employee confidence around this. Oh, that's just them complaining, or that's just industrial action. They're deliberately setting this up. And I've had to manage 4 of those where they're blaming industrial action and malicious product tamper on product recall. And that's in Australia. 4 of these I've had to do. And the issue actually wasn't coming from disgruntled unionised workers. The issue was actually coming from the production process and the fact that there was such a rush to move product through to guarantee supply that they totally forgot about guaranteeing food safety. There's a huge problem with that in our food processing industries globally at the moment. And, I think maybe some people might find that controversial, but trust me, food supply has far outranked food safety in global markets. So these are very reactive approaches. The other thing too is media can be a friend. when you're going into recalls. You don't have to treat them like the enemy. They're not out to get you. You need to have really clear, consistent messaging, and no story is not better than a story. In other words, you need to pipe up and say, we actually don't know what we don't know yet. We're investigating, and we'll give you timeframes of when we're going to find outcomes of investigation. So proactive and being on the front foot and thinking about how you want to approach food safety and food recalls, the potential of recalls, is a really good cultural practice to do. Is you need to encourage and reward the employees for saying, hey, I think we've got an issue here. I want some time to go investigate it. I need some resources. Thank God you're here. Please go do it. Come back as soon as you possibly can. Keep us updated of all of the steps, versus saying, don't talk about it. Go back to your production line, push it through, hope the customer doesn't notice. Yes, that stuff happens. It happens daily. And that's the scary bit about this, that no amount of food safety auditing can pick up those types of behaviours. Even food safety culture auditing is missing the point here. Some of our greatest critical control points are around personnel, and yet we never record those things. So when we talk about culture, it's about teaching and rewarding our people from being proactive around, could this potentially be a product recall? Please allow us to go and do investigation. And if it looks serious, let's set up a team and take it further.
So Peter, sorry to interrupt again. So if I'm a quality manager of a food business, and I want to build in some good behavioural practices around my recall plan.
Yep.
And I'm thinking senior management. So I'm I'm going from middle management to going up. Again, tough question, but how do you recommend you build in those behaviours to reiterate the importance of the behaviours up the chain?
Yep. I think what we've got to do is remind people that it's okay to push the big red button on the production line to stop if you think there's an issue. In other words, stuff is going past me on a daily basis on this production line, and I'm afraid to stop the line and to call it out. We need to try and stamp that behaviour out. So if you're a senior manager and you need to walk the talk, get down on the production lines, remind people that it's okay to stop things, even get involved in some of the inspections and talk about, well, where's root cause here? Historical issues such as, well, it's always been a problem, we can't do anything about it, just don't wash anymore. There's no excuse for not going back down the chain to the suppliers and working with them if they're your guaranteed source of raw material coming in and they're your preferred supplier, but you're still buying in the problem. Be proactive and get down the line with them. So senior management can help resource and fund and communicate the requirements and the needs to work with supplier and to work on the line to say, please stop the line. And then also to work with and to thank and reward the consumer and the customer for finding complaints, because every time we find those, it's a chance for us to fix the situation and do better. I mean, there's nothing worse than buying a large chunk of meat or pork, for instance, that's gone into a major retail chain, and you go to eat it and you find large pieces of bone fragment in it, and you go back and the supplier of that basically says, well, we can't get it out, it's just an inherent problem with the product. Is it really? Is it really an inherent problem? Or is there another way of approaching it? So for senior management, their role is to support and reward these practices that in the long run save you money. They really do save you money. You might think, oh, stopping a production line actually costs me money. Well, think about what it costs you to do a recall. And in Australia, it's not a cheap exercise these days. There's usually a bunch of zeros that sit behind it.
So just on that, can you give us an example of where, and obviously without mentioning names, but give us an example of where a recall/crisis process hasn't worked and what was the cause of that?
Sure. So I can talk about one that I was quite heavily involved in. It was with a baby food, a jar of baby food, and it was a rice-based product. And there was something that happened in the production process, and the rice wasn't properly cooked, and it turned out to be a potential choking hazard for infants that were feeding on it. It was picked up by a mother feeding a child. That it came through the customer complaint channel. And then so that was the customer complaint was a department, but it also linked in with their social media and communications department as well. So whilst that was being investigated back at the production, which eventually led to a recall, a mini crisis was actually developing on social media, where this mother was quite distraught and irate and started posting on the company's social media channel about how dare you're trying to kill my child, all these sorts of things. And they, rather than shutting down this issue, sorry about Big Ben in the background, it'll stop in a minute. There we go. Yeah, it is my timer, exactly. It's very, very vocal. So rather than shutting down the issue on social media, they kept playing into it and not admitting that there was an issue, trying to push it back. The number of people that started to follow and negatively respond to that on social media grew and grew and grew. That got too big and too intense for their social media team to manage. So they got their lawyers to come in and start to moderate the discussion on social media. This did not go well. This did not go well at all. This eventually turned into, to cut a very long story short, there were environmental groups getting in there saying, not only are you killing babies, but you're killing the environment with the growing and production of rice in Australia. So this was a recall that turned into a clear crisis event. This caused major damage, major disruption to this organisation, and this is Australian-based. It was,
and obviously it's a fine line between, you know, admitting you've got a problem when you're still investigating a problem, but also then denying, saying no, it's not an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. You're best off being on your front foot and saying, we think it's an issue, but we're going to take a proactive stance in the interest of consumer safety and act on it. That is the most succinct, clearest and most positive message you can have. Even if you don't believe it's a recall, but you want to protect your consumer's interest, brand confidence, and your business's brand name out there, this is what you'll do. Because don't forget, there's a halo effect in this industry. Okay, so I make tinned tomatoes, and we also import a lot of tinned tomatoes into Australia. This is just an example. It's not a real life thing. And now all of a sudden the imported tinned tomatoes have an issue. Actually, there's a much better issue, but we'll talk about this in a minute. The tinned tomatoes, imported ones, are being recalled. Now all of a sudden there's a drop in sales of all tinned tomatoes, including the Australian product. And our best example we've seen was the needle in the strawberries in Australia. It wiped out Australia's strawberry industry for 12 months because of one farm with one issue. So how do we act differently? We've been talking about how do we think differently about getting ahead of recalls. How do we actually start acting differently? So reactive means you don't really have a well thought out recall plan. And these are more detailed than you actually think. Sometimes people just go for a very simple 1 or 2 page recall plan. I think you'll find when you put these under stress tests, such as simulations, they fall over. That's been my experience. I've run hundreds of these things every year around the world, and they invariably fall over. Most people are about between 50 to 70% prepared for a recall using a simulation practice. That's my experiences to date. You don't have good detection and discovery tools of an emerging event, so make sure that you can find it from multiple sources. Is it off the line? Is it a maintenance or manufacturing issue? Is it consumer feedback? Is it on social media? Have a clear set of tools. Act first, as we were just talking about, Damien. Get ahead of it. Don't go viral with this stuff. Strike first. Try and steer clear of any conversation and communication on social media, because that's, death by jury, on those channels. You don't want to go that way. If stuff does get on there, keep a consistent message about referring them back to a consistent source of truth, which could be on your website, or it could be back onto media releases or media statements. So always refer back to a consistent source of truth.
Which is also obviously relevant for staff too, that are across, if they're getting questions, the media's on the doorstep of the business and doing staff, then that consistent source of truth is obviously really important.
And what's really important is one message said multiple times in multiple places has far more strength than multiple messages said everywhere, because we don't need your spin on it. We don't need your embellishment of an issue, or else we end up with purple monkey dishwasher situation, which means someone said this and then they've added that and they've added that. And before you know it, you're so far off beam on what the original message is that it doesn't make any sense, and it's doing way more harm than good. So limit the number of people that can communicate externally and also internally on this. Limit the sources of truth and state facts. Don't add opinion. And please don't promise stuff. Don't promise that it's going to be pulled out of the market in 2 days and that everyone's going to get replacement product. Here's an example. I was working with a brewing company and they had to do a product recall, and they were recalling individual cans. And they said, for every can that you were finding defective or that was in the recall code, we would give you a 6-pack back. So the smart people were buying the cases of beer, pulling out each can individually and getting a 6-pack back for every can. So they really scored big, and that the company didn't really think that one through. That cost them big time, just on the miscommunication or a missed opportunity to double check and fact check the communications on the recall. So just think about that. You give 6 products back for every one that you're recalling out of the marketplace. They should have said it was just replace like for like. So these are some of the things that we find when we get into the marketplace. So I know we're hard up against time right now, perhaps just slightly over. So Damien, thanks so much for allowing me to present some of the basics around this. I hope people have got some use out of this as well.
Thank you, Peter. Very insightful. I think we could probably talk for hours on this.
Yep.
And really value you sharing your experiences today and some lessons learned over your years of experience working in this space, not only in Australia, but internationally. Bear with me 2 seconds, sorry. There we go. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This has been a recorded session, and apologies that I didn't get to all of the questions. For those who sent the questions through, I think we got to a few of them, but the others I'll go back and respond to directly. This will be available and online, so it's a recorded session, so we'll have a link available to this afterwards. In the interim, if you have any questions of myself, there's my email address there, or likewise, SQF in general, info@sqfi.com. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thanks, Damien. Thanks, everybody.